Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Choosing a Cloud Platform, a comparison of public, private, and hybrid cloud. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a link to access the recording tomorrow afternoon via email. Second, for the duration of the webinar, all participants will be on mute. However, we encourage you to ask questions. If you would like to ask a question, please use the questions box to do so. We will answer all of your questions at the end of the session. And finally, if you experience any audio or technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know so that we can address those issues. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to James Anthony to get us started.
Thank you, Marissa. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're based in the world. My name is James Anthony, and it says here I'm the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for InnoApps. You can see from this my background. I've spent more than nearly 30 years now in the IT industry, predominantly working in and around Oracle, having worked for Oracle themselves, spent a lot of time in the partner community. And these days, I spend the majority of my time actually helping customers re-platform, upgrade, migrate, lift and shift, move and improve, all of those buzzwords into clouds of one or another variety. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Craig.
Thanks, James. Like James, I've had 20 plus years specifically in the Oracle space, and really our focus in my career has been on the tech stack, whether that's DevOps, it's database, it's Oracle e-business suite, it's Hyperion, it's private cloud hosting. I joined InnoApps recently last year after being with a company called Tier 1 for 15 years, where I did nothing but focus on the e-business suite and Oracle Hyperion space, and led me here today with James so we can talk to you about what we've learned over the years about different clouds that are available. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump into a little bit of InnoApps. We're going to do a real quick overview of who we are, followed by what we do, and then we're actually going to jump into the meat of the presentation. As Marissa had mentioned during the beginning of the call, please feel free to enter in the chat box any questions you might have as we go along, and we'll be sure to try to address them at the end. So InnoApps, who we are. So looking at this slide deck here, you can see that we are a global company and we are a professional services firm who focuses in Oracle, right? You name Oracle, we have the expertise to do it. With that said, we've got over 400 customers globally. We have 20 plus years of business excellence. We cover the globe from a North America, EMEA, APAC. And with that said, we've completed over 500 Oracle specific projects. With a dedicated Oracle focus, you have people like James on the phone, you have myself, and we're just kind of right now the face of InnoApps. Behind us, we have incredible technical expertise and teams with a lot of folks who have 10, 15, 20 plus years of focusing nothing but Oracle. And you can see the next one kind of leads to the next one of the Oracle certified consultants. Our folks in the cloud, the SaaS world, all of them focus on maintaining their certifications. And with that said, even increasing their abilities by taking on additional knowledge specific to Oracle. We have been an Oracle Cloud Service provider and the expertise, and we also undergo a SOC 1 and SOC 2 audit annually, so that our customers can, rest easy at night knowing that whatever we promise, we're being audited by a third party. Now to what we do, kind of who we are, what we do. You can see this is a lot of activity on this slide. In reality, if you look at it, we can break it down into a couple slices, right? We have our technical services on the left, covers everything from data migration, integration, reporting, custom extensions, and then we go right into database and hardware and technical delivery. So on that left side, if we were to look at this, you can see it's not only PaaS and SaaS, we also do managed services, and we focus on delivering it in an ITIL framework that includes business assurance, testing, as well as expert services. If we flip over to the right side, you'll see that we have application services. And I think for the benefit of what we're looking at, in between the two, you would kind of envision whether your environments are what we call on-premise, you're hosting it by yourself, or in the cloud, whether that's at a data center in what's called a private cloud, and we'll get to that later, versus what we refer to as a public cloud. So in between the technical and the application, there's got to be some sort of hardware in there, and we can manage that as well. From an application perspective, whether it's ERP, HCM, procurement, customer experience, we can do everything. We have a proven delivery methodology that we follow. Again, we're very much in the Oracle partnership and into the certifications, which drives us down to not only are we able to deliver the technical components of the project, we also offer the services around what most folks might consider a very important piece, or the most important piece of an implementation, is the strategic change that is your folks are going to be impacted by when you're taking on a new application or a new implementation. So with that said, I think probably right now, to not bore you, it makes sense for us to go ahead and jump into the meat of the agenda, where we're going to cover some pre-submitted questions. So for those on the call, thank you for joining, and more importantly, thank you for submitting your questions in advance to make sure we have content that's targeted directly to what you're interested in hearing about. And after that, we're going to jump into what we'll call a live Q&A. So as you enter any questions into that chat box, then Marissa will take the time. We're going to carve out some time at the end where we can address those questions as much as we can. And for those that we don't get to, we're happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you to address them in person. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and jump to the next question, to the first question. So one of the more common questions we hear in the business when we start throwing out the cloud world is a lot of folks are familiar with the public cloud, or at least they think they are, and then there's the private cloud. And you might hear kind of a variety of how they're described. So I think what's a really good lead-in question here, James, is how would we define the difference between a public and a private cloud?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, and I think what I always refer back to when a customer asks this question, or anybody asks this question really, is the NIST definitions. They've been around for a fair amount of time now, and they're a good reference structure for us to look at. I've pulled just a couple of portions out of here really to talk about, and those are the things we're interested in today. What is a private cloud and a public cloud? And I'm actually, whilst the slide's laid out like this, let's start on the right-hand side, because I think if you asked the person in the street effectively what they thought of as cloud, they would probably very much talk about public cloud, because that's what a lot of the marketing buzz, etc., is around. And that would be the hyperscalers we're talking about at the bottom: Oracle, Google, Azure, and AWS, predominantly as the providers. Clearly, there's others out there as well. But what you're really talking about with a public cloud is the capability to go to an organization and procure on demand with no operator intervention from the other side. Compute services, that might be, when we talk about various levels in the NIST definition, infrastructure as a service. I'm just going to rent some compute cycles, some storage and some network off you. Through platform as a service, I'm going to rent a database from you on typically an hourly billing metric. And SaaS at the top end, I'm going to rent an application from you, HCM, ERP, financials, whatever that may be. And I do believe that most people are now familiar with that. So let's go back to the first side of the slide. How does private cloud differ? Well, private cloud, and what we're clearly going to talk about is what InnoApps can provide as a private cloud solution, is provisioned by a single entity and provides services to those entities. But we'll manage and maintain all of that, and again, provide to organizations whatever level they want. So again, we can provide some services around platform. We'll host and manage a database in the solution for you, and you just consume that database. Or we'll host and manage e-business suite, and you consume e-business suite as a service. But I think the key difference really in those two is private cloud typically has a different level of service level agreements and an understanding of how you use those services. And probably in many cases, one of the benefits for me, and we'll talk about this perhaps a little bit later on, is with private cloud, the definition of what you're going to consume is often provisioned or defined a little bit early on. I am going to have exactly this, and that's what I'm going to provide, which actually avoids things like what we term rogue cloud or renegade cloud, where people just keep provisioning services and their bills start ticking up. I'd actually argue with a lot of what we talk about with private cloud, for those who've been in the Oracle arena, is that really this is just an evolution of what Oracle termed grid computing a while ago. We got the G in 10G when we had the Oracle database, and that grid computing was very much, if you think about it, the early stages of cloud computing. I'm just going to consume my database. I don't care which server it's running on or where that server is. It's just always available to me. And I think you can think of private cloud very much as that, but it's carved out for a smaller set of individuals in many cases.
Okay, thanks, James. Considerations. So I'm sitting here, I'm listening to this webinar. I now understand, okay, I've got a private cloud, I've got a public cloud, but really, where is the best space for my Oracle workload? So when I go to my boss, maybe it's the CIO, or maybe I'm the CIO and I need to go to the CFO or CEO and say, hey, I really think maybe the cloud could be the answer for our Oracle applications. What are some of the considerations that I should be doing my homework on before I have that conversation?
Yeah, and I think it will probably be no surprise when I show this as the next slide. And this is probably relatively peculiar to Oracle. The commercial considerations are key. And the interesting thing here in that case is often it's not the commercial considerations around how much is a CPU hour, because that's been a race to the bottom for a long time. An Intel CPU is just a commodity we can easily pick up from any provider these days. But from an Oracle perspective, and we're specifically talking about Oracle, it's Oracle licensing. And anybody who's been around the Oracle arena, that will be absolutely no surprise. You need to make sure you have the appropriate licenses when you get to the cloud, because bad things happen if you don't. So let's talk a little bit about what we're talking about here. Well, most people should be familiar with these, the core multipliers, whatever you call factors, whatever you term them. But in an on-prem environment, 2 Intel cores, and in the cloud, Intel is the predominant platform. Yes, we've got AMD processors, etc. in there as well, but we're talking about the x86 64 platforms. So 2 Intel cores, you need 1 CPU of Oracle licensing. In Oracle Cloud, 2 Intel cores, 1 CPU of Oracle licensing. Nice and easy, exactly the same thing. If we're looking at AWS and Azure, 2 Intel cores is 2 CPUs of Oracle licensing. So there's the gotcha straight away if that's what you're looking for from a hyperscale cloud provider and it's not Oracle. And a private cloud, building your own, using something like InnoApps or using another party, it's really going to depend. And it's going to depend on things like the hypervisor and the platform that provider has underneath it. That's clearly something we're going to come back to because it's an area we believe we've got a huge advantage in. We've built our private cloud platform so it understands and we get the same benefits as we would on-prem or Oracle Cloud, perhaps more in some cases. Now that's a surprising comment for me to make, perhaps more. Well, what else have we got to think about? Over provisioning. So this is something that we've been doing as organizations for a long time now and probably just taking for granted. We've deployed some level of virtualization because CPUs got really fast and really powerful and fairly cheap. And we deployed a server, and especially in dev and test and non-production environments, we could squeeze multiple databases and multiple WebLogic servers or multiple whole environments down onto a single server using that provisioning. Well, when we go to many of these clouds, they don't allow for over-provisioning. And by over-provisioning, we mean, I've got 4 cores in a machine. That's a fairly old machine these days, but I have 4 cores. I'll virtualize that up and I'll run 8 environments in it, each of which think they've got 2 full CPUs worth of processing power, or 2 full cores, for instance, processing power, but they don't. The virtualization is taking advantage of the fact they're not all busy at the same time. And actually, in some cloud environments, we can't do that. And if that means we go from having 4 cores between 8 environments, and suddenly we've got 8 environments, none of which are over-provisioned, that's going to change what our licensing requirement potentially disadvantageously for us. So you really do need to think about that. Clearly, that's the commercial side of things. We also need to assess our CPU needs. It's no surprise to everybody that the CPU drives performance. It drives performance of things like Java code that's running or the database, but it's also a key driver of how much I/O we can do as well. So we're going to need to understand what our current CPU environment looks like and then map that. Too many people, I think, focus on how many gigahertz we've got, but that's not what we focus on these days. We want to put some science into our comparisons. Now, at InnoApps, we tend to use things like the spec-int rate values, which are a good analogy to a database workload. And we look at what we've got on-prem or in an existing environment and the processes we're going to in the cloud, because Moore's law will tell us we'll get more processing power in the cloud if the CPUs are more modern than we would from an older one. We double the number of transistors every 18 months, roughly anyway. So we should get more punch for a pound in a new environment. So what that means is we want to right size as we go to the cloud. We don't just want to do, ideally, I've got 8 on-prem, therefore I'll have 8 in the cloud. That's not using the benefits of Intel economics to get the best out of the cloud. And how do we do that? Well, for those of you with things like the diagnostic pack at the database side, you want to use your AWR reports. They're an essential tool. They will tell us how hung up we are on CPU, how much IO weights we've got, what our service times are like, etc. For non-database, we have SAR, the MStat, top at the very simple level, but we want to look at what the CPU is, want to look at our utilization in our busy periods and come back to those comparisons on what the throughput of a current CPU is versus the throughput in the cloud. That's an area these days, Craig, I spend an awful lot of my time with customers, putting some science into the migration to help make sure they get the best economics when they get to the cloud without necessarily overspending as well.
Yeah, that's great. So James, one of the things that caught my eye, and I hope it caught others as well, is the big dollar sign on that first slide under commercial considerations. And really, we typically, as IT departments, we look at our Oracle licensing, and that's pretty much what most people see, right? They see the big dollar sign. They're afraid of stepping on their Oracle licensing, or more importantly, being audited by Oracle and having to, be told that they are under licensed. So I know there's some optimization available in cloud computing in terms of Oracle licensing. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the first area, and I think this is really important, is working with a provider like InnoApps, like Oracle Cloud itself, that can allow us to do bursting. One of the things we talk about with those NIST definitions is elasticity in cloud. I want to be able to scale up and scale down. And traditionally, when we bought technologies like Oracle on-prem, we would size for peak. So we'd go into a sizing meeting and figure out that we needed the biggest server Sun at the time, or whoever it was provider. Because at peak, let's take a retailer at Christmas or Black Friday or whatever it is, that is the number of CPUs we're going to require. And we would buy hardware for that and license for that. But in the rest of the year, we would perhaps be running at 10, 20% of that utilization. We might have peaks in between, end of month, end of quarter, summer sales, whatever else it may be. Well, actually, what we should be looking for is the ability to shift our licenses around when we're inside the cloud. And that does require a platform that supports it. That's the important thing to remember on the cloud. But that gives us the ability to consume what we need at a base level and scale up and back down as needed. So that is an area we think will, as people go to the cloud, give them a significant advantage to be able to optimize their license estate in. The other area we see is pilot-like DR. So one of the things we'd often have with an on-prem deployment is if we needed 20 CPUs worth of processing power as an aggregate to run our system, we pretty much had to provision that in a DR, because when we failed over to DR, we would probably need exactly the same amount of compute power as we would in a production environment. Well, actually, one of the benefits of a cloud environment is we're going to lean on our provider and make sure they always have the ability to have that compute power available to us if we need it. But that doesn't mean we have to have it provisioned and billed for on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. Instead, and those of you it talks about on here, and those of you who are familiar with DataGuard, for instance, as a technology, will know it requires very little CPU to run that managed recovery process and keep the database up to date. So why don't I just pay for that during that period and have that hot or warm standby, and I'm going to use the capability to scale up if and when we ever have to fail over. So the ability to have non-idle resources in your DR and not pay for those idle resources is a great thing. There's other benefits clearly around CO2 and energy consumption, etc. as well. And I just want to point out here that Oracle spent many years doing things like MAA, the maximum availability architecture. The InnoApps Cloud very much fits with that process. So it'll be very familiar to organizations who are looking to do that. And we can use all the design practices that have been there for years and are there for very good reasons as well.
Great. So we've talked about licensing, we've talked about CPU, but I know there's some other considerations we want to consider from a technical perspective. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, one of the areas, and it might seem strange to say sometimes it's overlooked, but storage is an important part. I think people have just taken storage as something that's given, and storage has got increasingly cheap for higher levels of performance. But it is a key driver, especially of database performance. A database ultimately is a place we store large volumes of data, and we get large volumes of data out. And that means we're doing I/O whenever we have that. It's really key. And without meaning to put certain cloud providers under the spotlight here, but we need to have an environment that can provide that level of I/O we need to satisfy our database at no additional extra cost. Some of the cloud providers out there have a platform that, shall we say, at outset looks fairly cheap and affordable, but when you get into having provisioned levels of I/O, guaranteed levels of I/O, they start making additional charges for it. And it doesn't always lend itself, in fact, it doesn't lend itself well to running a relational database and an enterprise grade database on there. So we're going to need to know, and again, we're talking about things like AWR and SAR and VMstat, etc. reports, what our level of I/O is. And we'll probably find that what we're going to in the cloud is more performant and should give us a boost in many cases. But performance isn't the end of the story. And these last 3 or 4 points in here are things that you really do need to consider. Databases are big and they back-end some of the most important things we have. And that means we're going to need to take non-production copies of them. Cloning for DR purposes, but also for test and dev. And we need to make sure when we go to the cloud, we can optimize that process. There's no point taking or moving to the cloud and taking some of the advantages of the cloud without solving challenges that we perhaps had on-prem. I want my development teams to have full size, or perhaps they look like full size, and I'll talk about thin provisioning in a moment, copies of the database. We need to be able to make sure we can optimize those. It's cheap, it's quick, and it's efficient. We don't want to be doing import exports of database anymore. The underlying platforms, for instance, in the OApps cloud gives us the ability to do thin provision databases for people as well. And that means optimum efficiency on the storage and therefore the costs associated with it. It also means speed of operations. It also means we're giving developers and testers full-size copies without necessarily incurring the overhead of that, as I say, from an operational storage costing perspective. What other considerations should we make as well? How does your DR look for database, but how does it happen for things like your WebLogic, your EBS tier, the shared file systems, etc.? We've got to make sure they fit with the existing DR models we're used to in an Oracle world in particular. And the final one I want to talk about in here is Oracle RAC. It has been, Oracle Real Application Cluster, it's been the cornerstone of many people's high availability environments. If you don't go to something like the OApps Cloud, which supports it, or Oracle Cloud, have you really got a cloud vendor that supports Oracle RAC? And if you haven't, are you making sacrifices by removing real application clusters and having that true 24/7, 365 operational capability for your database?
Thank you, James. And now I think the final question I have around the public-private thing is workloads. And I know you probably have an answer for this, but one of the questions that came up is, okay, I know there's a public, I know there's a private. Is there actually a workload that works better in one versus the other, or one you would recommend rather?
It's always horses for courses, and your mileage may differ and all of those things people say. But in my mind, when I talk to customers, I think public cloud often lends itself better where you have active projects or a DevOps lifestyle. If you're constantly wanting to spin stuff up and spin stuff down with no obligations, that's probably where public cloud comes into its own. But if you have an environment like Hyperion, like eBusiness Suite, just taking 2 examples, they are fairly fixed in what they do. They don't tend to flex constantly and go up and down. Yes, we might want to scale up some additional compute power for an end of year process or whatever it may be, but they aren't, these cloud native applications, as it were. They fit really well into a private cloud infrastructure where I can optimize for them, where I can have provisioned just what I want, tailored to my environment, and I'm going to keep that relatively static over its lifestyle. Now, there's also the element of combining these, and we haven't really talked about it, but for me, that's where something like the InnoApps Cloud, where we have that capability to customize something up for our own requirements, and then use some of the cloud services to augment that. Maybe I want to spin stuff off, do some analytics. Maybe I want a temporary environment just to test out an upgrade for it. And that hybrid capability, I think, it will dominate going forwards, Craig. There's no doubt about it. People will have an Azure environment because they'll have Office 365. So whilst a lot of the cloud vendors would absolutely love you to have everything in their cloud, I think the reality is most people are going to end up with some form of hybrid cloud going forwards.
Yeah, that's great points. Thank you, James. Now, I know we're moving to the next slide, and this one's near and dear to my heart because we actually had someone who's attending the webinar look at our website and kind of check out our services. And yes, so the question is, I understand you guys do have a private cloud. Can you talk a little more about it specifically? So James, could you take that one on?
Yeah, quite clearly, any vendor is asked to talk about their own offerings is going to be more than happy to do this. And just surprised that marketing didn't make us put it first and foremost and the only thing we talked about, Craig, but we're always happy to talk about it. And I think I've talked about some of these capabilities already, and let's just go over them. So the first thing is, we are Oracle experts. You talked about that right at the top, Craig. You said, we've got so many people with certifications, so many hundreds of years of experience between, well, probably thousands of years worth of experience between the teams. But that means we know Oracle and we know how to get the best out of Oracle running on a platform. And guess what? We've purchased and put together a platform that is absolutely a great place to run Oracle. So we can tailor that up for what you need. You want an old legacy version of Linux running on there. Yeah, no problems. We can do that. We'll manage that for you. We'll do it. So I think the area that's key for me in that sort of left side of it in particular is you're not sacrificing anything. We've got a SOC compliant database. We have all of the DR capabilities all running on Oracle technology. But what we're doing is we're probably moving the bar. In cloud, we often talk about the shared responsibility model. This is what you do. This is what the cloud vendor does. We kind of manage all of that and just go to providing this as a service to you. We'll take all the hassle out of doing it. We can provide all the rest of the services around backups, upgrades, compliance testing, vulnerability testing, all of those kind of things provided for you. But the key point is, and I'll probably whip onto the next slide here, is we're doing this in a platform that Oracle certifies as what's called trusted partitions. So I'm going to bring this right back to one of the first slides we put in there, which was commercial considerations. We have the ability when a customer brings their own licenses into the InnoApps Cloud to attest that when we say this thing is only going to run in 2 virtual CPUs, that Oracle know what that means from a license perspective, which gives us some significant advantages, and our customers, more importantly, significant advantages when it comes to spending those licenses in the cloud. They're going to get much more punch for their pound than they would in, say, Azure or AWS because of some of those punitive licensing rules. But because we are running in these trusted partitions, Oracle are validating those as well.
Okay, very well done. So I think this is where we're going to go to the questions. But before we take any of the questions from the folks listening in, and I apologize for jumping line here, we talk a lot about workloads. We talk a lot about Oracle workloads, James. Could you just kind of, from my own perspective at least, what's your view on moving Oracle workloads into the cloud?
I personally believe that this is an area where organizations are waking up to this now. I used to see a lot of project plans where the Oracle stuff was kicked right out onto the right-hand side of the project plan because Oracle was typically big system stuff, probably really quite heavily integrated with lots of other things as well, perhaps haven't been maintained and upgraded to latest versions. And now we have the capabilities to move those. The key thing, and I know, it's easy for us to say in this position, Craig, but when you move Oracle, you really do need to have a partner work with you that understands Oracle from the technical side and the commercial side as well. Because if you don't, you're not going to get the best outcome possible.
That's great. Thank you, James. And I think Marissa, I think we're at the point where we can go ahead and see what we have in the chat to see what kind of questions have come in. Did we get any?
Yeah, we did. Thank you, James and Craig. That was great. So we do have a few questions from the questions box, so I'll go ahead and ask those now. And just as a reminder, if anyone else has a question that they would like to ask, please go ahead and enter that into the questions box now so that we can get that answered for you. So the first question that came in was, is public cloud always cheaper?
I'm guessing I'll pick this one up, Craig. Not necessarily. I think actually, if you look at most of the cloud providers, yes, you could argue they procure hardware perhaps cheaper than organizations like ourselves can, but they also have to make healthy margins in that, and they have big overheads and offices and marketing and all of those kind of things to come from. And I suspect, and we have, we've borne this out for our own work and pricing these things up. If you look at things over a 3, 4, 5 year period, there really is much of a wash. So no, it's not always right to assume that a public cloud or a hyperscale provider is going to be cheaper than talking to somebody like InnoApps, for instance, and doing a private cloud solution.
Perfect. Thanks, James. The next question that we had was, are there benefits for OCI customers?
And James, I would try to tackle this one, but I know you're going to do a much better job. So can you answer this one as well?
Yeah, sure. Not quite. There's always benefits for OCI customers. We talked about things like the license comparison to, say, AWS and Azure, same as the InnoApps benefit has. OCI, if you're moving your database to OCI, yes, Oracle have got some attractive commercial models for that. There are certain technologies that come free that you perhaps had to buy on-prem, things like the diagnostics and tuning pack and transparent data encryption. If you move your database into Oracle's database cloud service, you're going to get those for free when you go there as well. Probably want to pick up offline with that and understand perhaps a more nuanced question that was being asked there.
Okay, thank you. So that wraps up the questions that we have had come in so far. But if there are any additional questions that you would like us to answer for you, or if you would like to have a personalized conversation with us regarding cloud migrations or choosing a cloud platform, you can use the contact information seen here on the screen to reach out to us. At this time, I want to thank you all again for joining our webinar today. I hope you got a lot of value out of it and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.